Number 10. Bob McDonnell, Governor of Virginia. Bob McDonnell seemed destined for greatness. Elected as Virginia's 71st governor in 2009, he was a rising star in the Republican Party, a charismatic leader with a strong conservative record and national ambitions. People whispered that he could be presidential material. He had the looks, the pedigree, the military background, and the political acumen. But behind the polished exterior was a man willing to sell his office to the highest bidder. In 2014, Bob McDonnell and his wife Maureen were convicted on federal corruption charges. The case centered around their relationship with Johnny Williams, a wealthy businessman and CEO of a dietary supplement company called Star Scientific. Williams showered the McDonnells with gifts, luxury vacations, designer clothing, and over $175,000 in loans and benefits. In exchange, the McDonnells used the power of the governor's office to promote Williams' company, arranging meetings with state officials, hosting events at the governor's mansion, and lending the prestige of their positions to boost Star Scientific's credibility. The trial was a spectacle. Text messages, emails, and testimony revealed a marriage in turmoil, a couple living beyond their means, and a governor willing to compromise his integrity for Rolex watches and golf outings. McDonnell was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. His wife received 1 year and a day. The conviction sent shockwaves through Virginia politics and served as a reminder that even those with presidential aspirations are not immune to the consequences of corruption. Though the Supreme Court later overturned McDonnell's conviction on a technicality regarding the definition of official acts, the damage was done. His political career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And the man who once stood on stages talking about values and leadership became a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition outpaces ethics. Number 9. Jesse Jackson Jr., United States Congressman from Illinois. Jesse Jackson Jr. had politics in his blood. The son of civil rights icon Reverend Jesse Jackson, he was elected to Congress in 1995, representing Illinois' 2nd Congressional District. For 17 years, he was a vocal advocate for social justice, education reform, and economic equality. He was seen as a champion of the people, a man carrying on his father's legacy. But behind closed doors, Jesse Jackson Jr. was living a double life. In 2013, Jackson pleaded guilty to federal charges of wire and mail fraud. He had been using campaign funds as his personal piggy bank, spending over $750,000 on personal expenses. The list of purchases was staggering and absurd: a $43,000 Rolex watch, thousands of dollars on fur capes and parkas, Michael Jackson and Bruce Lee memorabilia, mounted elk heads, expensive furniture, even a fedora once owned by Michael Jackson himself. Jackson's defense claimed he was suffering from bipolar disorder and depression, conditions that impaired his judgment. While mental health struggles are real and serious, they did not excuse the systematic theft of campaign contributions meant to support his political work. He was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. His wife, Sandy Jackson, a Chicago alderman, was also implicated and sentenced to 12 months for filing false tax returns. The fall of Jesse Jackson Jr. was particularly painful because of what he represented. He was supposed to be different, a leader fighting for justice and equality. Instead, he became another example of a politician who believed the rules didn't apply to him. He served his time, was released in 2015, and has since faded from public life, his legacy forever tarnished by greed and entitlement. Number 8. Kwame Kilpatrick, Mayor of Detroit. Kwame Kilpatrick was supposed to save Detroit. Elected mayor in 2001 at the age of 31, he was young, charismatic, and ambitious. He called himself the hip-hop mayor, a new generation of leadership for a struggling city. Detroit was facing economic decline, population loss, and crumbling infrastructure. Kilpatrick promised revitalization, hope, and change. What he delivered was one of the most corrupt administrations in American municipal history. Kilpatrick's crimes were extensive and brazen. He used city funds to lease luxury vehicles, threw lavish parties at the mayor's mansion, and ran a criminal enterprise from his office. He took bribes, rigged contracts, extorted businessmen, and obstructed justice. He used his power to enrich himself and his inner circle while Detroit continued to deteriorate. The scandal that initially brought him down involved a cover-up of an affair with his Chief of Staff, Christine Beatty, and the wrongful termination of police officers investigating misconduct in his administration. In 2008, Kilpatrick was convicted of perjury and obstruction of justice. He served 99 days in jail, but that was just the beginning. Federal investigators continued digging, and in 2013 Kilpatrick was convicted on 24 federal felony counts, including racketeering, extortion, bribery, and fraud. He was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, one of the harshest sentences ever handed down to a public official. Kilpatrick showed no remorse. Even at his sentencing, he maintained that he was a victim of a political witch hunt. But the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors proved that he had stolen millions from a city that could least afford it, that he had betrayed the trust of people who believed in him, and that he had used his position for personal gain with no regard for the consequences. In January 2021, President Donald Trump commuted Kilpatrick's sentence, and he was released after serving 7 years. The decision was controversial, with many Detroiters furious that a man who had done so much damage to their city was being set free. Kilpatrick's story is a reminder that corruption doesn't just harm abstract concepts like trust and democracy. It has real, tangible consequences for real people living in real communities. If you're still with us, hit subscribe to Echoes of Confession. We uncover the stories of power, corruption, and the price of betrayal. Number 7. Duke Cunningham, United States Congressman from California. Randy Duke Cunningham was a war hero turned politician. A former Navy fighter pilot and Vietnam War ace, he shot down 5 enemy aircraft and earned the Navy Cross for his bravery. After his military career, he entered politics and was elected to Congress in 1990, representing California's 50th district. He served on the powerful House Appropriations Committee, where he had influence over defense spending and military contracts. It was a position of immense power, and Cunningham exploited it to enrich himself in one of the largest bribery scandals in congressional history. Cunningham accepted over $2.4 million in bribes from defense contractors in exchange for steering government contracts their way. The bribes came in many forms: cash, cars, antiques, Persian rugs, and even a yacht. He created what prosecutors called a bribery menu, a literal price list detailing how much contractors needed to pay for his influence. Want a contract worth a certain amount? Here's what it'll cost you. It was corruption laid bare, transactional and shameless. In 2005, Cunningham pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit bribery, mail fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion. At his sentencing, he wept, apologized, and claimed he was ashamed of his actions. The judge was unmoved. Cunningham was sentenced to 8 years and 4 months in federal prison, the longest sentence ever given to a member of Congress at that time. Cunningham served 7 years before being released in 2013. He moved to Arkansas, living a quiet life far from the power and prestige he once enjoyed. His fall from grace was total and absolute. A man who had once been celebrated as a hero became a symbol of everything wrong with Washington, a politician who sold his office and his integrity for money and material possessions. Number 6. Aaron Schock, United States Congressman from Illinois. Aaron Schock was the future of the Republican Party, or so they said. Elected to Congress in 2008 at the age of 27, he was the youngest member of the House of Representatives. He was good-looking, social media savvy, and had a carefully curated image that included shirtless Instagram photos and globe-trotting adventures. He was everything modern politics seemed to demand: young, charismatic, and media-friendly. But beneath the polished surface was a man using taxpayer money and campaign funds to finance a lavish lifestyle. Schock's downfall began when reporters noticed his congressional office had been redecorated in a Downton Abbey theme, complete with custom furnishings and expensive artwork. As journalists dug deeper, they uncovered a pattern of fraud and abuse. Schock had been billing the government for mileage on his personal car, far in excess of what the odometer showed. He used campaign funds and taxpayer dollars to pay for private flights on luxury jets, concerts, sporting events, and exotic vacations. He even billed the government for a trip to attend the Super Bowl and a performance of Katy Perry's Prismatic World Tour. In 2016, Schock was indicted on 24 federal counts, including wire fraud, theft of government funds, and making false statements. He faced decades in prison, but in a controversial move, federal prosecutors dropped all charges in 2019 after Schock agreed to repay taxes and campaign funds he had misused. He avoided prison, but his political career was over. Aaron Schock's story is a modern tale of narcissism and entitlement. He believed his youth and charm made him invincible. He thought he could live like a celebrity on the public's dime, and no one would care. He was wrong. While he didn't serve time behind bars, his legacy is one of greed, deception, and a stunning lack of accountability. Number 5. Rod Blagojevich, Governor of Illinois. Rod Blagojevich was brash, loud, and unapologetically ambitious. Elected governor of Illinois in 2002, he positioned himself as a reform-minded Democrat fighting for the little guy. But in reality, Blagojevich saw his office as a tool for personal enrichment. He shook down campaign donors, threatened to withhold state funding unless he received kickbacks, and most infamously tried to sell the United States Senate seat vacated by Barack Obama after he was elected president in 2008. In wiretapped phone conversations, Blagojevich was caught discussing the Senate seat like it was a commodity. He said the seat was effing golden and he wasn't going to give it up for effing nothing. He explored options, asking what he could get in return. A cabinet position, a high-paying job, campaign contributions. The recordings were damning, and they painted a picture of a man who had completely lost touch with the responsibilities of his office. In 2011, Blagojevich was convicted on 17 counts of corruption, including bribery, conspiracy, and wire fraud. He was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. Even as he was led away, Blagojevich maintained his innocence, claiming he was being persecuted for practicing politics as usual, but the evidence was overwhelming and the public was disgusted. Blagojevich served 8 years before President Donald Trump commuted his sentence in February 2020. His release was met with mixed reactions. Supporters claimed his sentence was too harsh. Critics argued he had gotten off easy for betraying the public trust in such a blatant and shameless way. Rod Blagojevich's story is a quintessential tale of political corruption. He didn't just bend the rules, he shattered them. And in doing so, he became a national punchline, a cautionary tale, and a symbol of everything wrong with Illinois politics. Number 4. Edwin Edwards, Governor of Louisiana. Edwin Edwards was a Louisiana legend. Elected governor 4 times between 1972 and 1996, he was known for his charm, his wit, and his complete lack of shame when it came to corruption. Edwards once joked that the only way he could lose an election was if he was caught in bed with a dead girl or a live boy. He was flamboyant, charismatic, and seemingly untouchable. For decades, rumors of corruption swirled around him, but nothing ever stuck, till it did. In 2000, Edwards was convicted on 17 counts of racketeering, extortion, and fraud related to the licensing of riverboat casinos in Louisiana. He had used his influence to rig the licensing process, ensuring that applicants who paid him bribes received approval while legitimate operators were shut out. He extorted hundreds of thousands of dollars, funneling the money through shell companies and intermediaries. At his trial, Edwards showed no remorse. He was defiant, even joking with reporters. But the jury wasn't amused. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He served 8 years before being released in 2011 at the age of 83. Even after prison, Edwards remained a colourful character, briefly starring in a reality TV show and making public appearances. Edwin Edwards' story is uniquely American. He was a man who treated politics like a game, who saw corruption as just another tool in his arsenal, and who believed his charm and wit would protect him forever. In the end, the law caught up with him, but even in his downfall, Edwards remained unapologetic, a rogue to the very end. Before we continue to the top 3, subscribe to Echoes of Confession. Some truths are too dark to stay buried, and we're here to tell them all. Number 3. Dennis Hastert, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. Dennis Hastert was one of the most powerful men in America. As Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2007, he was second in line to the presidency. He was a respected Republican leader, a former high school teacher and wrestling coach, a man known for his quiet, steady leadership. But behind that respectable facade was a man hiding a dark and disturbing secret. In 2015, Hastert was indicted on federal charges of structuring cash withdrawals to evade bank reporting requirements and lying to the FBI. But those charges were just the surface. The deeper, more horrifying truth was that Hastert had been paying hush money to cover up sexual abuse he had committed decades earlier when he was a high school wrestling coach. He had molested at least 4 students, young boys who trusted him, and when one of those victims threatened to expose him years later, Hastert agreed to pay $3.5 million in blackmail to keep the secret buried. Hastert pleaded guilty to the financial crimes. Because the statute of limitations had expired on the sexual abuse, he could not be charged with those acts. But during his sentencing hearing, victims came forward and testified about the abuse they had suffered. The judge called Hastert a serial child molester and sentenced him to 15 months in prison, the maximum allowed under the financial crimes he was convicted of. Hastert served 13 months and was released in 2017. He is now a registered sex offender, living in disgrace. His story is one of the most disturbing on this list, because it involves not just corruption of power, but the exploitation and abuse of children. He was a man trusted with shaping young lives, and he violated that trust in the most heinous way imaginable. Number 2. Chris Collins, United States Congressman from New York. Chris Collins was one of President Donald Trump's earliest and most enthusiastic supporters in Congress. Elected in 2012 to represent New York's 27th district, Collins was a wealthy businessman turned politician, a vocal advocate for tax cuts and deregulation. But in 2018, his world came crashing down when he was arrested on insider trading charges. Collins served on the board of Innate Immunotherapeutics, an Australian pharmaceutical company. In June 2017, he received confidential information that a drug trial had failed, information that would cause the company's stock to plummet. Instead of keeping that information to himself as required by law, Collins called his son Cameron and tipped him off. Cameron sold his shares before the news became public, avoiding over $700,000 in losses. Cameron then tipped off his fiancée's father, who also sold his shares. The scheme was blatant and traceable. The FBI had phone records, trading records, and witnesses. Collins initially denied any wrongdoing and even ran for re-election in 2018, winning despite being under indictment. But as the evidence mounted and a trial date approached, Collins realized he had no defense. In 2019, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud and making false statements to the FBI. He was sentenced to 26 months in federal prison. In December 2020, President Trump pardoned Collins, wiping away his conviction and allowing him to walk free. The pardon was controversial, with critics arguing it sent a message that wealthy, well-connected politicians could break the law without facing real consequences. Chris Collins's story is a modern tale of greed and privilege. He had wealth, power, and influence, but it wasn't enough. He had to cheat, and when he got caught, his political connections saved him from serving his full sentence. 1. William Jefferson, United States Congressman from Louisiana. William Jefferson represented Louisiana's 2nd congressional district for nearly 2 decades. He was a powerful member of the Congressional Black Caucus, a respected voice on issues affecting his predominantly African-American district. But in 2005, federal investigators discovered something shocking. $90,000 in cash hidden in Jefferson's freezer, wrapped in aluminum foil and stuffed inside frozen food containers. The money was part of a bribery scheme involving telecommunications deals in Africa. Jefferson had been taking bribes to use his congressional influence to help American companies secure contracts in Nigeria and other African nations. The FBI conducted a sting operation, and the evidence was overwhelming. They had video of Jefferson accepting cash, they had witnesses who testified to the bribery scheme, and they had that freezer full of cash, one of the most bizarre pieces of evidence in congressional corruption history. In 2009, Jefferson was convicted on 11 counts of bribery, racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison, one of the longest sentences ever given to a member of Congress. He served part of his sentence before being released in 2017. William Jefferson's story is the ultimate example of corruption hiding in plain sight. He was a respected congressman, a community leader, a man who had the trust of his constituents. But he was willing to sell that trust for cash, literally stuffing bribe money into his freezer like it was leftover groceries. His conviction sent a message that no one, regardless of position or prestige, is above the law. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. United States? United Kingdom? Canada? Nigeria? We want to hear from you and your thoughts on politicians who abuse power. These 10 politicians represent a cross-section of American political corruption. Governors, congressmen, a Speaker of the House, Democrats and Republicans, young and old, from different regions, different backgrounds, different eras. But they all share one thing in common. They believed they were above the law. They believed their power made them untouchable. They believed they could steal, cheat, lie, and abuse their positions without consequence. They were wrong. The American justice system, for all its flaws, has shown time and again that it can hold the powerful accountable. These men went to prison not because of political vendettas or partisan witch hunts, but because they committed crimes. They betrayed the public trust, they violated the oaths they took, and they paid the price. But their stories should also make us uncomfortable. These weren't cartoonish villains. They were elected officials, people who won the support of voters, people who at some point believed in public service. What happened to them? Was it the corrupting influence of power? Was it greed? Was it arrogance? Or was it something darker, a fundamental flaw in character that was always there, just waiting for the right circumstances to reveal itself? We may never know the answers to those questions. But we do know this. Power without accountability is dangerous. And when politicians forget that they serve the people, not themselves, the consequences can be devastating. This has been Echoes of Confession, counting down the top 10 American politicians who went from power to prison. Subscribe for more stories that expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how powerful the people involved. In the end, justice came for all of them. Some served their full sentences, others were pardoned or released early. But their legacies are forever tarnished, their names are synonymous with corruption, and their stories serve as warnings to anyone who thinks that power means immunity. The law, when applied fairly and consistently, is stronger than any individual, and in America we hold on to the belief that no one is above it. Not governors, not congressmen, not even those who once held the power to shape the nation. These politicians went from power to prison, and their echoes of confession remind us why integrity, accountability, and justice matter.